So, a few years ago, I made this video, back when Volume 7 was the latest volume of RWBY to be released, and one of the things I say in that video is this. None of the characters have openly stated what their sexuality is, and that's okay. The show is about kids fighting an evil witch, and magical ladies, and ancient relics, and trying to save the world, and running for their lives. There's not a lot of opportunity for the characters to sit down and just talk about their crushes. This thought has been on my mind lately, especially now after Blake and Yang have finally openly showed their feelings for each other, because the more I sat back and thought about it, the weirder I felt. I've been trying to wrap my head around why Blake and Yang's confession felt off to me. It's been something I've been waiting to see for a long time now, so why does something feel off? Well, the more I thought about it, the more I reflected on my original shipping video, and the more I realized I was actually pretty wrong. The characters do actually have a ton of time to sit around and talk about their crushes. A lot of my headspace while writing that original shipping video was centered around Yang and Blake's slowly burbling relationship trying to happen, and on Crow and Clover's seemingly romantic interactions between them, which is why I ended up saying this. A lot of what we perceive to be these characters' orientations is based solely off of what's implied in the show. None of the characters have openly stated what their sexuality is, and that's okay. I was coming from the mindset that an LGBTQIA+ character doesn't need to other themselves to reveal their sexual orientation. Because sometimes when you take a character and plop them center screen just for them to explain their sexual orientation, it can come across as pandering. LGBTQIA+ people are just regular people too. Their sexual identity or orientation doesn't need to be the only thing defining their character. We never expect straight characters to sit down and exposit how straight they are to the camera, so I appreciate it when we treat queer characters the same way. Making it come up naturally in conversation always feels more realistic to me. And at the time of my shipping video, there wasn't a lot of good opportunities for characters to naturally bring up their romantic interests. They were running around, worrying about the Doom Witch on the horizon, there was betrayal and all this kinds of crazy stuff. Stopping to chat about who they're crushing on is going to be hard to naturally throw into the conversation during these scenes, and honestly, take May Marigold as a perfect example of that.
Oh, funny. That's why we're here. So feel free to take a hike.
When Volume 7 came out, it was revealed on Twitter that May is trans, and unsurprisingly, a lot of people went, "Cool, too bad you didn't bother bringing that up in the show at all." Because yes, everything I just said is still true. Having your characters bend out of shape in order to reveal how LGBTQIA+ they are feels weird and unnatural in a script. But also, having to call out your representation on social media afterwards kind of defeats the point of representation. It reminds me of the first Disney gay character thing. If you haven't seen this, Disney has notoriously revealed their first gay character like 50 different times, and every time they think they can get away with it because their LGBTQIA+ characters are blink and you'll miss it. Some random background character with 3 lines of dialogue. A character who might ever so subtly hint at their sexual orientation, but it's quick enough that they can cut those scenes out of the worldwide release of the film. A great recent example, the first non-binary character in a Pixar movie, and then I watched it, and I think they had like 3 words to say total, and the fact that they're non-binary wasn't even addressed or anything, so then they got just lumped into the background with the other 700 members of Wade's family, and that was it. So it makes the representation feel awfully hollow, doesn't it? Yeah, you could grab any show, point to a random background character and say, yeah, that person is gay, but that doesn't really make it representation. Now obviously, it's incredibly important to have representation in all forms, but it's a bit trickier with sexual identity and orientation, because honestly, it's impossible to tell at a glance what someone's identity and orientation even is. It's really easy to notice when you look at a group of people and there's only a bunch of white folks. Sexual identity and orientation isn't something that's skin deep. So with characters like May, having their identity being confirmed mainly through social media gives off the feeling that this was being a last minute thing. Even if that isn't how their character designs actually worked out, it still comes across that way. Like, you couldn't have been bothered to have it in the show, it has to be some throwaway thing on a completely different website, especially when you look at all the characters around them who actually get screen time. Here's May Marigold. This season, we're gonna spend a ton of screen time with all of the Aesops, and we're gonna see a bunch of Robin, but not May. Fiona is going to get quite a bit of screen time and plenty of lines, but not May. The only member of the Happy Huntresses who will have less lines of dialogue than May will be Joanna. I don't know, man. Why did the first canonically trans character in RWBY have to be swept off screen? So, looping back around to my point about having these topics coming up in conversation, May is arbitrarily stapled to RWBY's team in Volume 8. Kind of. She helps them sneak in, but then she weirdly disappears once the actual, conversation and action scenes start happening. And then later, when the characters are sitting around sipping tea, they have to find a way to have May actually address her transitioning because this is the only time they're gonna get the chance to do that.
And to the Marigolds, that meant I wasn't their son anymore.
And I definitely appreciate them actually having this in the show proper, but man, this whole exchange between her and Weiss feels so clunky. You can just tell they didn't really know how to have May address this naturally, given any of the conversation topics that was currently happening in the story. So, where am I getting at? Well, May's identity being vague and minimal is really a good example to sum up talking about RWBY's LGBTQIA+ representation as a whole. I see people insisting that this show is very progressive, but the more I thought about it, the more I start to question how true that is. So, like I said, how often do these characters have time to sit around and talk about their crushes? Well, weirdly enough, lots and lots of times. Yang was introduced to us by flirting with Junior, and then was openly drooling over shirtless boys. Blake was introduced with Adam, and it became apparent through her dialogue that there was some sort of relationship between them. And then once Sun was introduced, the two of them start showing an attraction to each other. Weiss instantly starts flirting with Neptune once he was introduced, while Jean was flirting with Weiss once they met. Speaking of Juniper, Pyrrha's whole character centered around her crush on Jean, to the point where she didn't ever really talk to anyone else in the show before she died. And literally, the very first moment Nora was introduced, it was setting up her massive crush on Ren. Even RWBY has had some weird little moments with Oscar. You could make the argument that this is meant to be building up their friendship, not a romance though. But yeah, out of the 9 main characters of the show, almost all of them have had the time to show their attraction to the opposite sex. And with 2 of them, Pyrrha and Nora, their whole personalities center around them being attracted to a man. Even when Pyrrha starts to get wrapped up in the maiden plot, she still circles back around to Jean. He's the only character she confides in. He gets to chase her into the vault because everything she does always goes back to her feelings for him. And Nora's the same way. Ren has gotten to develop on his own, finding himself doubting the actions the heroes have taken. Ren and Nora separate, and Ren starts questioning the plot and the characters' hands in it. Meanwhile, Nora is still thinking about Ren. While he's off having a completely unique point of view and development compared to the rest of the hero team, Nora is still standing around talking about Ren. Literally, her whole arc is admitting that she has no personality outside of her attraction for him. The claims that RWBY is this super progressive show start to feel questionable when I'm standing there looking around going, well, where is all that progressiveness? The first actual indisputable queer relationship on screen was Saffron and Tara. We met them in Volume 6. So let's do this. Let's make a chart, counting out all of the moments where characters showed some form of attraction to a person of the opposite sex versus the moments where a homosexual attraction between characters happened. Importantly, I'm going to classify this side as male ex-woman and not just straight, because there are definitely characters who will be in this section who definitely seem to be either bisexual or pansexual. That'll be a bigger point I'll discuss later on in the video. So, from the start of the show to the introduction of the Kata arcs, we've had Yang flirts with Junior, Blake and Adam had a prior relationship, Jean flirts with Weiss, Pyrrha crushes on Jean, Blake and Sun show attraction to each other. Oh, but over here, technically, Yang and Blake did go to the dance with each other for 3 seconds during prom. I'll count that moment. We'll just put that right there. Cool. Alright. Port has a gross moment where he winks to Yang. Ren and Nora start dating. Neptune and Weiss flirt. Neptune flirts with the Malachite twins. Neptune flirts with Team Indigo. Oh, but wait, over here? There are times where it seems like Emerald is attracted to Cinder. In RWBY Chibi, though, they have Emerald allude to Cinder being a mother figure, so it's a bit up for interpretation, I guess, but I am going to put that right here anyways. Might as well, right? Anywho, Crow winks at Winter that one time. Some people think this is meant to show attraction, so I guess I'll include it. Crow talks about thirsting for maid girls. Neon calls Yang pretty, we can put that one over here. Tai was married to Raven, then Tai was married to Summer. Jacques is married to Willow. Gira and Kali are married. Lee and An were married. Henry tries to flirt with Weiss. Oh, here's a big one. Ilya admits she had a crush on Blake. Heck yeah. Anyways, Neptune tries to flirt with Ilya. Ozma and Salem have a messy relationship, which is also the catalyst for literally the entire plot of the show. Also, one of Ozpin's past lives had a wife, Terra and Saffron. So, I know I'm not very good at math, but I think there might be a bit of a difference between these two different categories. I remember people really started throwing around the word progressive when Ilya had her confession, but looking at the numbers, the show has spared no time having male x female moments, relationships, flirtations, etc., etc., and the crumbs of LGBTQIA+ relationships are a stretch at best. So it doesn't really feel progressive. Also, I can't help but notice that the very few moments of homosexual attraction are all between two women. The only time in the history of RWBY where there seemed to be a gay romance between male characters was Crow and Clover. The same winks and shy blushes we've seen attributed to heterosexual moments of flirtation are now finally popping up here with Clover and Crow. How adorable! I love them! Literally, this is actually my favorite ship from any show ever. They are precious, and I think their dynamic is so interesting together. And then, when Clover died and everyone pointed out, hey, this kind of feels like bury your gays, suddenly RWBY had to come out of the woodwork to insist that there was never anything between them. Nope, there never was. It was never there. Definitely there was never an intent for them to look romantic in any way, shape, or form. Well, okay then, going off of that, there has just never been a queer relationship in all of RWBY that has involved a person identifying as male. So how is the show supposed to be progressive again? And it doesn't end there. After Terra and Saffron, the next canonical queer relationship was Yang and Blake finally kissing in Volume 9. So picking up our list where we left off, I'll include Crow and Clover here, even though they supposedly didn't ever really count, according to RWBY. Grown women openly fawn over Jean, and then Weiss now has the hots for Jean now that he's an old man. Blake and Yang kiss. There are 7 or 8 instances of queer attraction, I might have miscounted, across 9 volumes. In that same runtime, there's been nearly as many moments where characters with vastly different ages, and in some instances, characters are dubiously under the age of consent, including the literal introduction of 2 of our main characters. Literally couldn't wait for the creepy older men to get all hot and bothered by Yang, but we had to wait for 9 volumes for her and Blake to actually confess to each other? And isn't that something? Volume 9. 9 whole seasons had to pass before we got our second canonical queer relationship. It was getting to the point where some people, myself included, doubted if it was ever going to happen. Because while it took up until Volume 9, there was some murmurings of the ship long before then. There was fan interest in the ship right from the very beginning. Then it got bolstered by Volume 3's scenes, and then in Volume 6 we start to see them make bedroom eyes at each other, holding each other. The two are closer now more than ever, but then it was still 3 whole volumes from then until they actually openly spoke about their feelings, having their attraction on screen, but also unspoken. And yeah, the fandom's go-to counterpoint was that this was a slow burn. Well, I would argue there's definitely a difference between a slow burn and not even turning your oven on, especially when this is the only pair where the writing seems to be slow burning. In the time it took for Yang and Blake to actually openly show affection for each other, Nora had shown interest in Ren, and then the two grew to have a mutual attraction with each other, and then they kissed, and then they told each other, I love you, and then they decided to put the relationship on the back burner to figure themselves out. Ren and Nora had a whole arc, a whole beginning, middle, and end to their relationship where they grew and developed together all before Blake and Yang started their relationship. And in all honesty, Ren and Nora are actually a much better example of what a slow burn looks like, because this is actually cooking. That's part of a slow burn, is that things do cook, things do happen. People misconstrue the word slow burn when talking about Blake and Yang to imply that nothing happens for a very long period of time. That's not what slow burning means. Slow burning still has things progress incrementally. Ren and Nora are gradually, over the course of every volume, developing their characters and relationship with each other. You can see the big moments that punctuate them taking that next slow step together with their relationship. And I think that explains the thing I said right at the beginning of the video. Blake and Yang are finally together, so why does it feel off to me? It's because they never had a relationship before now. Ooh, those dubious words. Planned from the beginning. Shortly after the bees finally kissed, suddenly members of RWBY started throwing around the idea that this was planned from the beginning. And as we know, no one ever lies about things on the internet, right? Personally, I find the claims that it's been planned from the start pretty suspicious. After all, during the writing process, a lot can change from the initial plans people make for their characters and story structure. Even amateur writers can tell you that the plan from the beginning of the story hardly ever stays true to how the events actually end up, because as you write, you naturally stumble upon unexpected ways of developing your characters and story. So while I think it's much more likely this decision slowly got created as the progression of the story happened naturally, I can't deny that there was always very early signs for the bees. If you listen to the Volume 1 actor commentary track, Barbara and Aaron make it very clear they ship Yang and Blake. So there's always been something that leans towards the idea of the ship. Whether or not the writers intended to lean into that ship from the beginning isn't quite as obvious though. But let's take their word for it. Blake and Yang were planned from the beginning. Fine. So if this has been planned from the start, how did it still end up so bad? Blake spent years being attached to Sun, blushing as he points at her, going to the dance with him, and that whole time, Blake would only occasionally reference Yang, but always alongside the rest of Team RWBY.
Ruby, Weiss, Yang, they were my friends.
I remember getting to know Ruby and thinking, this girl is the embodiment of purity. I saw Weiss was defiance, and Yang was strength.
If this was supposed to be planned from the beginning, why aren't they showing us that? Blake spends her time on Menagerie giving Sun cat faces and calling him
My hero.
But then, once she's standing in front of Yang at Haven, the dynamic suddenly shifts. Suddenly, Blake is constantly at Yang's side, trailing after her like a lost puppy. This comes out of nowhere. Yang had spent some time in Volume 5 lamenting how hurt she was when Blake left, but all of that time, Blake never once talked about having any sort of feelings for Yang. So now that Blake is insisting on stapling herself to Yang, this sort of feels like it's coming out of nowhere. And then suddenly, we get to Argus, and the two girls are giving each other fuck me eyes, and like, when did this start happening? We went from Yang being upset Blake abandoned the team, and Blake not talking about her team, to Blake now being obsessed with Yang, and Yang is still being upset, to bedroom eyes. They didn't talk to each other between these points, it just, they suddenly can't stop looking at each other. They never resolved anything. When did this happen? That's why I say Ren and Nora are a better example of what a slow burn looks like. We can very clearly see how their feelings for one another evolve as the show progresses. See what exactly happens between them to make them start behaving differently as the relationship develops. Nora starts the show clearly smitten with Ren. Ren is obviously very close to Nora, but doesn't seem to display any outward ideas of romance for her. The two even openly deny the idea of a relationship.
How did you and Nora,
We're
not actually together.
together.
Then once they travel with Team Ranger, Ren goes through a lot of turmoil facing the Grimm that raised his home. And the person who's there to emotionally support him is Nora. She talks him back to his senses, she holds his hand when he needs comfort, and yeah, once the threat is gone and they have time to rest, Ren seems to have developed feelings for Nora because of how she supported him during these times. Fast forward to Atlas, where Ren and Nora find themselves arguing because they have differing views on the politics they're stuck in, and Ren is having doubts about what they're doing, and that seeps into their personal relationship, where the two are both clearly frustrated but want to try to make it work. Nora especially is spearheading this idea. She wants to try and make this work, but Ren is stonewalling her. And then after a lot of time alone, a lot of contemplation, and a bit of sacrifice, that's when Ren realizes he also wants to build this bridge with her.
I love you.
Because I've always loved you, Lyran.
But by this point, Nora wants to do her own soul searching. They still love each other, but they want to be able to develop more as individuals. Very clearly, each point of their relationship is easy to follow, from "we're not together to "I've always loved you, Lyran," to "I need to see who just Nora is." Their actions together and with the other characters and the plot naturally led to each point of their relationship's development. And that just is not visible with Blake and Yang. Things just suddenly happen with them. They'll just start looking at each other differently between episodes. I can't imagine this was planned from the beginning when it feels rushed and underdeveloped. And when Blake and Yang do confess, they jump straight to "I love you"?
I think I love you. I love you too.
Nobody starts a relationship with "I love you."
I think I'm in love with you.
What? What?
What?
Blake and Yang's relationship has been bedroom eyes and blushes at best. They're going to start their relationship on "I love you." It took Ren and Nora 4 volumes after they finally started dating to finally tell each other that they loved each other. Literally, how can you classify this as a slow burn when it starts with "I love you"? And some people are going to scoff and roll their eyes because I'm using Ren and Nora as the example here to compare to Blake and Yang. Well, I would honestly love to be able to use an example of a queer relationship's development in the show, except that there is none. Blake and Yang are the only example of a developing LGBTQIA+ relationship in the whole show. Don't you see? That's kind of the whole problem. That's the point of the video. Jumping straight into making out sessions and "I love yous" makes their whole relationship feel rather performative. Like, they aren't trying to build their development, they want to get it done and out there. That's why I make the joke on Twitter that the bees only got confirmed because they wanted to make money off of their confirmation. It doesn't feel like a genuine conclusion for their relationship. It doesn't even feel like a genuine start for their relationship. There is barely any building blocks holding this thing up, and we're meant to believe this was how you've planned it from the beginning? So, people are scarily dedicated to Bumblebee, and RWBY in general. A lot of people will take great measure to build up the idea of Bumblebee. I'm certain there'll be plenty of comments on this video trying to debunk every single point I've made. That's fine. I'm not here to yuck your yums, I'm just here to explain myself. But because of that steadfast commitment to Blake and Yang, and the fact that they wholeheartedly believe in the idea that they were planned from the beginning, this fandom has the real bad habit of erasing away bisexual identities with the characters. Remember what I said earlier? I called it male x female instead of just calling it straight. Because there are plenty of those characters who are definitely bisexual or pansexual. Neither one specifically has been confirmed, but it's clear looking at the characters that they've shown attraction to. Most importantly, Blake and Yang. Like I said before, Yang was introduced to us by using her feminine wiles to dupe Junior into receiving a wild haymaker. Okay, technically it wasn't a haymaker, but it's funnier when I word it that way. And then Yang purrs at boys as they're bunking before orientation. Take a look at everything we've addressed here already. Believe you me, I would love to see more lesbian representation. Like how I'd love to see more LGBTQIA+ representation in general with this show. But Yang is clearly not a lesbian. She's been attracted to men. I think it's safe to say she's bisexual or maybe pansexual. According to the writers, Blake is supposed to be her first time realizing she's attracted to women, her queer sexual awakening in a sense. And that's really cool. I can totally see that. So why do some people insist Yang wasn't attracted to men at all before? And you know what? Honestly, it's fine. It's totally fine to see these scenes and think there was more romance between the girls earlier on in the story. If you want to headcanon the scene that Yang didn't like the boys and she was instantly attracted to Blake, that's fine. Like I said, I want more LGBTQIA+ representation, and if headcanon is the way to do it, that's fine. But a lot of people will go out of their way to insist on their headcanon and will accidentally end up discrediting the canon that leans more towards bisexuality if we look at it. And you know what? Honestly, I would love it if it was all true. I wish the show could be as obvious and overt about Blake and Yang's feelings for each other as the fandom insists they are. Suddenly it's, Blake went with Sun to the dance just as friends. Those blushes weren't romantic. We'll insist Blake never dated Adam. Their partnership was business, not romantic, which is not only erasing away parts of their development, important parts of Blake's specific development with the White Fang and her family, but also it leans all to bi-erasure. And I assume it's likely a side effect of all those seemingly heterosexual moments from before. The show is flooded with male ex-woman moments, flirting, dating, marriage, the whole 9 yards. And, like I've expressed earlier in this video, it's frustrating. The show props itself up as this progressive story with LGBTQIA+ characters, but those characters are more often than not side characters, barely able to express their identities on screen, or sometimes forced to only be revealed in the supplementary material. So we can see how the fandom can be frustrated and want to see all that so-called representation the show promotes actually being seen. But it's not fair to overcorrect too far in the other direction, because this leads to a lot of cases of bisexual discrimination. Bisexual discrimination is very real, and often bisexual folk face discrimination from all sides. Not only the typical forms of bigotry aimed towards homosexual people, but also from other LGBTQIA+ identifying folks, in essence being too gay for some but not gay enough by others. There's a long history of bisexual people facing discrimination both in and out of the queer community, primarily through denying their existence or undermining or mocking their orientation, like that chart I showed you earlier. It is technically impossible to pinpoint which exact characters are bisexual or pansexual. Like I mentioned before, it's not something you can see that's skin deep. Technically, any of these characters could identify as bisexual, and we just might not know it. So this chart is a little disingenuous, I'll admit. It's not showing us straight characters. If we rearrange things around to split up the moments where it involved a bisexual or perhaps pansexual character into the homosexual category, this chart would look different. And that's part of a problem with bisexual erasure in general. That's part of why they face discrimination from others in the LGBTQIA+ community. At a glance, you might assume it's just a straight couple. And a lot of insults aimed towards bisexual people will be along the lines of, well, if you end up with a heterosexual partner, then you're not really queer, are you? It's an insult that still persists outside of the RWBY community as well. And I tried to go to great lengths to include the bisexual community in this video, because when I was making this list of all the moments where a man and a woman show attraction to each other, I didn't want to paint it as these are all straight moments, because being bisexual is still valid, but too often this community will invalidate bisexuality. RWBY already barely has any real LGBTQIA+ representation in the show. So it's not fair that the fandom can seem to be so okay with casually taking out one of those letters. And the thing is, this topic is usually centered around headcanons about Blake and Yang, and I can understand wanting to see them as something that might be closer to how you feel. It's not technically bad that you want to headcanon Blake and Yang as lesbians, that's fine. The thing that gets me is that this idea of bi-erasure has already very publicly happened with Crow and Clover. Yeah, remember when I talked about them from before, back in the beginning of the video? It really felt like we were setting up Crow to be bisexual. He showed plenty of interest in women before, but now he's blushing at a man. And this is the one time the creators of the show actively took that away. RWBY hammered it home. No, Crow and Clover are not meant to be seen as a romantic pair. They did this as crowd control because of Clover's death. No, we're not burying our gays because Clover was never gay. But in doing so, they also openly stripped away the bisexual identity Crow was hinting at. The one and only time RWBY stood up and said no to a ship, it came with bisexual erasure. So this, as a topic, is a sensitive one to cover in general. Everyone's views on what is and isn't good representation is going to be different, and I 100% understand if your personal views on the topics I presented here are different from what I've said. Sexual identity and orientation is broad and vast, and everyone has their own personal journey through it. So how do I try to wrap up this discussion? What was this all leading to? Well, first and foremost, I think it's pretty clear that I think RWBY could be doing a lot more with its representation. And I'd like to bring up one more thing in regards to this. So, earlier I mentioned how Blake is apparently Yang's bisexual awakening, but I didn't talk about Blake. According to the writers, Blake is more comfortable with this kind of thing, implying she's known about her sexual orientation for a lot longer. But the thing is, that isn't shown to us on screen. Yang is literally the only woman we've ever seen Blake show any kind of attraction to. Blake's blushed at Sun, we've clearly hinted at a relationship with Adam, but even when Ilya expressed her feelings to Blake, Blake gave her nothing in return. Yes, Blake seems to be bisexual, but I can't help but feel like that could have been explored before she started kissing Yang, or at least shown to us. It was like I was saying with May Marigold at the very beginning. The bi-erasure wouldn't be happening if we could actually confirm their bisexual identities, both with Blake, Yang, or any other character in the show. So let's take a look at that great big list of romantic instances. A lot of these instances were just throwaway moments. A line here or there. A character used in one scene. That sentiment I had from my original shipping video seems to be very wrong. There's not a lot of opportunity for the characters to sit down and just talk about their crushes. In all honesty, looking at this, it seems very easy for moments of attraction to be sprinkled regularly throughout the show. So I can't help but wonder why these little moments couldn't also be used to highlight LGBTQIA+ representation. Blake and Yang's confession feels empty to me because of a lot of reasons. It feels like they've jumped past the natural points a relationship would be developing into, making their confession feel like a speed run rather than a real relationship. After waiting for an excruciatingly long time for the characters to finally admit their sexuality, we jump right into the deep end with I love you. It feels both like it was insanely rushed and also like it took forever to happen. And then there's something else about it too. After Blake and Yang kissed, as of the time of me writing this script, there have been 10 merch items specifically highlighting Bumblebee. 10. Including a long sleeve t-shirt that's $44, a hoodie that's $59, and a really ugly varsity jacket that's $119. In that same amount of time that all of this Bumblebee merch released, RWBY only got 8 pieces of merch, most of them reusing the same few Ice Queendom art pieces. Weiss, in a similar boat, had 7 merch items, and on top of that, Blake had 6 merch items where she's by herself and Yang had 4. The show is called RWBY, but I can't help but notice that half of the team isn't being marketed nearly as much as the other half. Bumblebee feels like a cash grab. Like they only jumped to I love you because they knew they could monetize the ship. It's awfully convenient. This thing that you've made tons of expensive merch items for happened right after the company very publicly started to struggle financially. But yeah, it was planned from the beginning, right? Hey, it's Carrie. Animation is hard and expensive, so buy this $100 hoodie with Blake and Yang lazily holding on to each other. Yay! And you know what? people do. Bumblebee fans eat this shit up. They reel back and talk about how super progressive and inclusive RWBY is, but I cannot help but look at this and think that that's not really true. Yes, RWBY has some LGBTQIA+ characters, but I'd hardly call them very progressive or impressive. In fact, the more and more I see other shows that are much better examples of representation, either by having better development between the relationships of queer characters or by having generally more openly LGBTQIA+ characters who aren't trapped as background extras. The thing that bothers me about Rooster Teeth and its fans insisting the show is really progressive is that it gives off the impression that this is good enough. These crumbs of representation can barely be bothered to actually address May as trans on screen after getting backlash about it not being confirmed in the show, stripping away Crow's bisexuality because they didn't want to be accused of burying their gays, barely seen queer relationships that took over a decade to finally be spoken about out loud, and just ultimately feels like a cash grab. These are the things we're praising? I would say this is a start, but this is far from being considered good representation. And it frustrates me when people shower RT with praise just for doing the bare minimum. What's worse is some parts of the fandom get offended when people address how this all could be better. No, it's not perfect how it is. In fact, I think they have a lot of work to do. And that's what we should always be striving towards. Doing more and being better. And looking at these people producing these shows and asking them to be doing more. A lot more. Disney throws a random background character on screen, confirms they're gender neutral on Twitter, and calls it a day. No one's happy with Disney's representation. We should have higher standards than this, and Rooster Teeth is barely doing more. We should be looking at RWBY and challenging them to be better, because let's be honest, canonically, in the show, the only presumed confirmed sexual identities we have that fits in LGBTQIA+ is 1 trans woman, 3 lesbian women, and 2 bisexual women. And that's it. Whole 9 years, hundreds of characters, and this is it? This is all the representation you could muster? And it's not like they didn't have the opportunity to have more, as we can see. There've been tons and tons and tons of moments where attraction was the topic of the dialogue. So why are we acting like these scraps is the best thing ever? I say we should not only be holding Rooster Teeth to a higher standard when it comes to LGBTQIA+ representation, but all media in general. It might feel like a tricky conversation to have, but it's definitely one worth having. We can't grow to have more and better representation if we continue to place the bare minimum on a pedestal. Shout out to my $10 patrons, you're all amazing. Nako, Andrew, Valhalla Knight, Chamomile, G Extreme, Classy Critic, Noah Perkins, Sunny Shy, Jake, Amber, Hype Man, Zero to Hero, Isaiah, Scaring Crows, Not All That Evil, Messiah Complex, Jacob, Ben's Sketchbook, The Watcher, Omega Fighter, Trash, Wild Pilot, Josh, Swift Cannon, The Infinity Effect, Gino, Twisty, and Juan. Coming in with a really long, heavy topic video. Woo, it's been a while. What did you think? This is a very sensitive topic to talk about, which if I see any forms of bigotry or hate speech in the comments, I'm just going to block you. I'm not going to deal with that. You are not welcome here. If you are homophobic or anything like that, you will be eliminated from my comment section, so don't even bother. What did you think about this topic? It's a sensitive one, and I don't think there's any wrong answers other than bigotry, like the way you see representation, but I do think we should be focusing on asking for more. So what do you think about this? There was a lot I talked about. I wanted to make it make sense, so I hope I did that. I would love to know your thoughts and opinions in the comments, and I would see you in the next one. Bye-bye.